Good morning. I'm Atty. Trixie Cruz-Angeles, and you are tuned into The Spokes. From the palace halls, then to our group chats now, we will be giving you conversations that will make you think and assess so you could come up with your own personal opinion. For our first topic today, noted by the Spokes, well, we're flying solo in case you haven't noticed. The Executive Secretary by now, former Executive Secretary Lucas Bersamin and Budget Secretary Amenna Pangandaman have tendered their resignations, and both resignations have been accepted. The DBM and the Executive Secretary were both mentioned in the flood control probe. Secretary Pangandaman had a press conference last Friday to defend the President's national expenditure program. But before that, there are floating video clips of DBM Secretary thanking everybody and saying, we should be thankful we have a budget. It was a matter of time before the Secretary of the Budget, the attention of the people or the crowd was focused on DBM Secretary Amenna Pangandaman. After all, on the executive side, she is mainly responsible for putting together the budget, for organizing it, and for the releases for approved projects, as well as under the GAA expenditures. Now, she has had more than her fair share of defenders, but it seems that the volume has increased over the past few weeks. Zaldico, former Congressman Zaldico, mentioned her prominently in his expose, saying that she herself was the one who asked for the budgetary insertions of 100 billion purportedly for the President. Now, this is a direct accusation or a direct narrative from Congressman Ko and a positive identification of the DBM Secretary. It was through her that former Congressman Zaldico claims that this issue of corruption on flood control reaches all the way into Malacanang. So, it is also her prominent mentioning, as well as Congressman Zaldico's prominent mention of Executive Secretary Lucas Bersamin's nephew, Undersecretary Adrian Bersamin, that may have led to the tender of resignations from both officials, not just the ES. And the acceptance, the immediate acceptance of the President seems to be telegraphing something as well. Normally, a President who has full trust and confidence in his secretary will take time. They will assess the situation and see if there is a necessity for that cabinet secretary to resign. After all, these serve at the pleasure of the President, and the President can calibrate if that pleasure is still present. In this case, the immediate acceptance can signify something. Number one, that their continued stay may cause instability in the cabinet, or maybe they're already quite inconvenient. Furthermore, their positions as public officials require them to be transparent, and so it cannot be far behind that they will be subjected to further scrutiny. Since then, a new executive secretary has been assigned or designated. It is none other than Secretary Ralph Recto, now ES Ralph Recto, moving from the Department of Finance, going into the top management position. After all, the executive secretary is also known as the little president. Taking his place in finance, Frederick Go, previously the advisor to the President on financial matters. Meanwhile, in the DBM, Undersecretary Rolando Toledo is the OIC. Will this lead to a quieting of the earth-shaking revelations. Will this lead to stability? This remains to be seen. It isn't a very good idea, well, it isn't a very good situation that these cabinet secretaries, formerly trusted and entitled, or at least experiencing the highest trust from the president, are leaving under these circumstances. Next on our noted, of course, how can you ignore the major revelations by Senator Amy Marcos, declaring directly that her brother, the president, and his first lady, Lisa Marcos, are using illegal drugs. Last night at the rally in the sponsored by the Iglesia Ni Cristo, or held by the Iglesia Ni Cristo at the Rizal Park in Manila, Senator Amy, in a 28 or 29-minute speech, directly pointed and confirmed what many have been suspecting even before, or confirmed the rumors that have been swirling around the president since the campaign period. This affirmation, now we're wondering if this affirmation is going to lead to a major change or a shakeup. Is the president going to take this seriously? Even right now, we are seeing the statements coming out prominently from Congressman Sandro Marcos saying that these are merely all lies. But denials are easy. It is accusations that are a little scarier because the presumption is that these things are backed up by solid evidence. Now, Senator Amy is a credible witness, being up close and personal with the president for most of their lives. She did mention in her speech last night that in the past 3 years, she and her brother have not been speaking. I think I can attest to this one, at least for the early months of this presidency. Senator Amy was never in Malacanang during the times that I was there. So it isn't really, this is something that can be easily confirmed. This gap between the president and his sister is unusual because of the closeness that he and his Ate Ime, as he used to call her, have been since they were kids. The president himself, in a previous interview, noted, this was during the campaign, that he and his older sister have a uniquely diverse relationship. Meaning, as kids, they had a lot of fights, but they also developed a closeness. At the time when Senator Amy was leaving for Morocco after their exile, it was a poignant moment when she had to inform her brother that it was time to grow up because she would not be around. So it also indicates that Senator Amy has maintained her ate status. In fact, when the president won the presidential elections, one of the first major questions by the media was, how is the president going to handle his super ate? The belief at the time was that she would be making decisions, would be acting as executive secretary, but those rumors were quickly put to rest. At any rate, the fallout from this particular revelation remains to be seen. Will the denials made by close family members be sufficient for the president to weather this storm, or are we looking at major shakeup and major changes? We'll be watching as the developments come in. In a while, we will be joined by a distinguished economist to help us understand the economic impact of this political turmoil, and there's a lot of turmoil. It's been an amazing week as far as turmoil is concerned. When the spokes returns after this short break. And the spokes is back. Joining our discussion is a distinguished professor of development economics at the Salle University, Dr. Jesus Felipe. Welcome to the spokes, sir. How are you?
Thank you so much. A pleasure to be here. Right,
How long have you been in the Philippines?
I've been from the Philippines for almost 30 years already.
You are a visiting professor, or
No, I'm a full professor.
you're full, and so you're a
professor.
resident.
Yes.
You've had time to observe and study the Philippine economic situation. So could you tell us what is the state of the Philippine economy right now? We're certainly feeling the crunch. So how do you assess it right now?
Yeah, that is a very pertinent question. I think there are two sides to the story. The first one is the events that are taking place that we all discovered a few months since the last few months, and that these events are really affecting the economy. And they're affecting the economy because both consumers and investors are really waiting to see what happens. This is a standard in all economies when there are situations like this one. So what we observe is that both, I insist, consumers and investors are refraining from spending in a wait-and-see situation.
Okay.
So this is affecting, of course, the growth rate that we expect for this year. That is what is happening.
So this is until the year end. We've heard about the loss of investor confidence.
Correct.
And we have been seeing a major or a rapid decline of foreign direct investments in the country. But are you saying consumer spending is also affecting the economy?
Sure. We all are waiting to see what happens, how the political situation, the political turmoil, how it ends up being during the next few months. So all of us are really refraining from consuming, and this is really affecting the economy. So both of these factors are really fundamental in understanding what drives growth in the Philippine economy. And I think most forecasters are really thinking that the government forecast that had already been downgraded a couple of times are not going to be met this year. So I think basically we're going to grow 5% if things go very, very well. Let's see what happens still during the month of the rest of November and December. But remember, the administration began in 2022, 23 by forecasting and really hoping that the economy would grow between 6.5 and 8%. We have not had a single year of that growth. And what the administration has been doing during the last 18 months, 2 years, is downgrading this forecast. There is an underlying story behind the Philippine economy.
We'd like to hear it.
That underlying story is, this is what a team of researchers in La Salle have been studying for the last several years. And in fact, we have a book forthcoming next year. We need to understand that the Philippine economy is still a relatively poor economy for international standards.
I'm sorry, what is that?
Poor economy.
Poor economy by international standards.
Very poor economy.
What's wrong with us?
Well, this is basically due to the composition of our employment and the activities that most of our workers do. I don't know if you know.
The composition of our employment.
Sure. So over 20% of our workers are in primary agriculture at very low wages. Another 25% are in what we call wholesale and retail trade. These are people selling things in the street.
Yes.
And another almost 10% is in construction. When you put all this together, that is 50% of our workers are in activities of low productivity, consequently low wages.
Yes.
So what happens is that what underlies the current situation. So what corruption is doing is making things even worse in terms of how the country moves forward and what is going to happen during the next few years. So we need to differentiate between the shock that is happening now and the reality of the nation. Even without the corruption scandal, still the country probably would not have been able to grow by what the government told us in 2022 because of the type of economy that we have. That is not an economy that can support 8% growth, as the government was telling us that we could do in 22-23.
So this 8% growth, therefore, that's a pipe dream. What is the most we can expect? Well, for this year, since it's...
For this year, I just said, is 5%, and I think many people would say that I'm really optimistic. Some people would say probably moving towards 4%. You see, 4% for an economy like the Philippines is very low. We need to grow much faster, precisely to increase incomes, wages, and income per capita. So 4%, if it materializes, it will be really a tremendous blow for all of us.
Should there be more investments in the sectors that you identified where we have these workers, construction, agriculture, trade.
Yes, but your terms have to be properly understood.
All right. How do we properly understand these
there
terms?
are two different sides to the story, and this is known because it's the history of development across the world, and in particular our regional neighbors, Korea, China. If you ask what did they do during the last few decades,
Yes.
they did basically two things. One of them is to transfer workers out of agriculture into sectors of higher productivity.
Such as?
Manufacturing.
Of course. So
And this is what we don't
industrialization,
have.
of
And
course.
this industrialization, you just hit the right chord. And that's something that this country has really not done. So it's very difficult really to try to talk about 8% growth without having the type of industries that our neighbors managed to get into. This is what we refer to as changing the structure of our economy. Today, the sectors that are really gaining employment are the ones that I mentioned, wholesale and retail trade. That doesn't bode well if we're thinking about increasing wages and income per capita. So this is one
you're
thing.
not making anything.
Well, these are people.
Yes.
These are the delivery persons in motorcycles.
I
This
see.
is a very respectable job. Don't
Yes.
misunderstand me.
Yes, of
But you're
course, but
thinking
it's
from the
still-
point of view of the nation to say, is this the type of employment that we need to catch up with South Korea and Singapore? The answer is clearly not.
Your
There is differentiation.
study goes back several years. In the 80s, after 1986, the Philippines undertook an ambitious agrarian reform program, and the purpose was to move the assets of oligarchic families with a lot of land, so that they would invest in industrialization.
Yeah.
Are you saying that this did
Didn't
not
work.
really work?
Didn't
Okay.
work. Didn't work the way it was
So,
expected.
yes.
Because for a number of reasons is that the land was partitioned, but in the end it went back to the original landlords, and nothing has really happened. That is in some cases. In some other cases, what we need is still land consolidation. That is to get what we call in economics increasing returns to scale. That is you cannot have
Increasing returns to
scale. It's very difficult for agriculture to really engineer a productivity shift in the economy. The type of plots that we have in the Philippines are very small in some areas,
Yes.
in some crops. So it's very difficult to mechanize those small areas.
That's true.
And in order to
So we need
get,
to
and that is the idea
consolidate.
that you get into decreasing returns. That is, you put a second worker, a third worker, and the productivity is very small.
But isn't this what happened? During the land reform era, where land reform was being conducted on a large scale, they broke up a lot of the agricultural estates, which many believe were already efficient. They were large estates, but we ended up breaking them up to award them to smaller farmers who were tenants on these estates. But the money was not immediately released by government.
Correct.
And so it kind of defeated the purpose of transferring out the assets. But in addition to that, it also broke up these estates. I mean, I've heard this theory. Do you think this is what happened here?
Partly correct. So what we ended up having is very small plots, and this is what they need to be consolidated. That is, there is a minimum size in agriculture that makes agriculture productive. Yes. Below that, it's very difficult to really make agriculture productive. This is the problem that we have. And this is particular in some crops like rice. We have very small plots, and that's why they're very inefficient. And that is why production in some crops is very low in terms of productivity and yields. And we cannot compete with some of the countries in the region. So yes, agriculture is a big problem. And the idea of really developing is sending these workers out of agriculture. For comparison, I just mentioned that about 25% of employment in the Philippines is in agriculture. It's a bit less than that. In the typical developed country, the share of employment in agriculture is no more than 5% of all workers.
This is due to mechanization.
It's mechanization, of course. Workers get out of agriculture because it's the least productive sector of the economy. It's the sector that pays very low wages. So workers move into manufacturing. So once you start releasing the sector from workers, is when agriculture's productivity increases. That is when you can mechanize. And that is the history of development, and that is what all advanced economies in the West did, and that is what Japan, Korea, and China have been doing recently. And we have not been able to do that yet.
The raging controversy right now is the more than 1 trillion expenses that were supposed to be for flood control.
Yes.
This was supposed to be for climate resilience.
Correct.
And part of the infrastructure program. This did not help by your assessment. Do you think it helped? Because you're saying that the other significant employment in the country is in construction. So did this not at least help?
No. Let's really understand construction. I'm talking about workers in
Yes,
building,
in construction.
In construction. Yes. What happened with the projects that have not been either completed or the ghost projects
yes.
is that really what we are suffering is from deficient infrastructure. It's very simple, and that is the most direct effect of what has happened. The most direct effect is that millions of Filipinos are not enjoying the public goods that they should be having, and this happens in infrastructure, but also in other areas that are fundamental that appear in discussions is education and health.
Yes.
So the question is, and this is the other side of what development is about. You need a government that spends. And a government that spends in all these public sectors, but for decades, the standard administrations of the Philippines have been very fiscally conservative. Fiscally conservative.
Really?
Yes,
Well,
they're
yes.
really afraid of running budget deficits. And it's very difficult at the state of development of the Philippines to really move up and develop without the government running budget deficits. Let me explain this clearly because people really misunderstand it. A budget deficit is simply transfers of funds created by the government and the central bank to the public sector. So every time the government spends, it's simply transferring funds to somebody in the public sector. It's to build the road or to build the school or to build the hospital. And we don't do that at the scale that we should be doing it. And that is why we're talking about the problems that we have, not having a proper education system. We have, the government claims that we cannot build the schools. Schools can be built clearly, or take care of, or build more and better hospitals.
So you're saying that the government, this year, the government actually cut back on construction projects or major infrastructure projects, supposedly to be more efficient in its spending. Are you saying that it should be the opposite? We should be going towards more spending, particularly in infrastructure.
Particularly in infrastructure and these other public services that I'm mentioning about. The typical question that appears is, where does the government get the funds to invest? And what most people do not know is that these funds come out of nothing. In other words, governments do not spend taxes. That is a big misunderstanding.
This is new. Okay.
This is new. Okay.
This is new for me.
When any government spends, what it's doing is calling its banker. And the banker of the Philippine government is the central bank, BSP. And BSP automatically provides those funds. In the banking terminology, those funds are called reserve balances. And there is no limit to those balances. In other words, the pesos that are spent come out of thin air. And this is not just in the Philippines, this is in every single economy. So it is simply not true that in order for the Filipino government to spend on a road or on a school, you need to pay taxes. This is simply incorrect. It doesn't happen that way, not in the Philippines, not anywhere in the world. The government is simply acting together with its banker, which is in the Philippines called Banco Central Filipinas, and they create the money out of nothing. And that is how governments spend. So it's really misunderstanding that we do not have these public goods because taxes are low, tax collection, it's simply incorrect.
I see. So in the previous administration, there was also an ambitious program called Build, 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 with a lot of investments made in government infrastructure. So we changed the face of Metro Manila. There are so many flyovers. I got lost one time. And airports, seaports, and all that. Are you saying this is the way we should be going? This is the correct approach?
This is the correct approach. Let me with an important footnote. In terms of correct planning. In terms of correct planning, that is what is needed. That is, but we cannot start any discussion in the Philippines about why we don't have the infrastructure that you and I would like to enjoy, or schools or hospitals, because we don't have money. That is absolutely incorrect. The money, of course, if by money would mean pesos,
Yes.
the Banco Central has as many pesos as it wants. And the Treasury of the Philippines has as many pesos as it wants. The other thing would be to say, do we need dollars or do we need foreign currency? That's a completely different story. But pesos, which is what we need to build most of the roads, schools and hospitals, that's not a problem.
So you're saying is that even right now, the government has the tools to turn the economy around.
Yes.
We just need to spend it.
We need to spend it wisely and do planning. I'm not saying that suddenly the budget has to double out of the blue. No, I'm saying when you hear certain officials saying we need to be careful because we don't need resources, we don't have resources or we don't have the money, that is absolutely incorrect. The Philippines has pesos to do that.
What effect do changes in leadership have in our spending? Does this in any way affect our economy? Well, in terms of these, we know that long-term planning is essential.
Yes.
But what about these short-term, the sudden changes in leadership? How do they affect?
This is one of the bigger problems of the Philippines, what we call lack of policy continuity. And
Yes,
there are some things that we argue that should not change when the government changes. But it is true that the constitutional system of this country says that we have a president every 6 years, etc. The government tends to change. But this doesn't mean that the things that you and I are discussing should be changed because there is a new administration. So what we are thinking is that there should be a plan that no matter who is in government, the plan is met. And this plan should be, or should concern, the provision of public goods for the 120 million people that live in this country. So this has nothing to do. There was a bill, and that should have continued because the country lacks infrastructure.
Yes.
And the same thing happens with education and with health. And I'm talking about these three sectors because they are fundamental to the development of any economy. There are many others, but these are fundamental.
So,
or taking care of, you allow me, children malnutrition, stunting. Through, for example, school feeding programs, meal programs that other countries have implemented. And nobody asks, what does the money come from? It comes from the government. The government has money to do this.
We're interested in more on that. Likewise, could the government be sabotaging our own long-term growth by trading integrity for underinvestment? But before you answer this, the spokes will return immediately after this short break. And we're back, the spokes, with the LSU professor, Dr. Jesus Felipe. Our hanging question was, could the government be sabotaging our long-term growth by trading integrity for underinvestment?
I think the word sabotage is a bit strong.
All right.
I don't think anybody in the government has
would do this deliberately.
No, far from that. What I think is that there are severe misunderstandings about how the government finances work.
Yes.
There are people who believe, even in the government, that the government finances are like your finances or my finances. Mm-hmm. It is true that you and I cannot spend as if there is no tomorrow. We have what is called, very simple, it's a budget constraint.
Yes.
You can get debt for some time, but sooner or later, somebody comes to you and says, return it. That is not the case of a government. That is not the case of a government. I just said that one thing is to say, if you ask me, can the government spend as if there is no tomorrow? The answer is no. The other thing is, does the government have the same budget constraint that you and I have? That is incorrect. Because the government has a power that you and I do not have, which is to create what we call, in simple terms, money. And it was a little bit the way I was explaining before. That is, what the government of the Philippines does, in particular, the economic departments, in particular budget, treasury, is to coordinate with the central bank.
Okay.
And all this happens, basically is in the balance sheet of the central bank. Every time treasury says, I'm going to spend, and I'm going to spend because I'm going to pay somebody 100 million pesos to build a road. Do you really believe that what treasury does is to go to a baul and get 100 million pesos? That's what people think.
Yes.
No,
That's
it's
what I-
very incorrect. That doesn't happen. It doesn't happen.
Okay.
What Treasury does is Treasury has an account at the central bank.
All right.
And the central bank creates something called, in the banking terminology, reserve balances. So immediately in the Treasury's account appears something called reserve balances for 100 million.
Where does this reserve balance come from?
From heaven. From heaven. Central banks.
Okay.
Central
They
banks create money
it.
that way,
I
out of nothing. That is the money that we use today. Let me get you.
All right.
You allow me
All
for a
right.
second. Get my wallet.
Props.
This.
All right.
If you read what appears in this bill, it doesn't say that you go to BSP and you're going to get a kilogram of gold. There is nothing. It's called fiat money.
So
And
most
this has been-
governments work on fiat money.
All modern governments, of course, including the Philippines, and this has been going on for a long time,
All right.
since the 20th century. Before, we had something called the gold standard.
Okay.
And the gold standard had to do with the relationship between the currency and the amount of gold. That broke up, doesn't exist. So what central banks do today is simply create money out of nothing.
I see. So now, okay, now I understand more or less how it works. But, for example, what can the government do? Right now, investor confidence is down.
Yeah.
And what can we do? What can government do to restore that confidence? Is
Well-
it even necessary?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. It's a first order problem. But you see, this has, up to point, nothing to do with what you and I are discussing, how the economy functions. It has to do with the political situation. And what the government has to do is to solve the problem expeditiously. You see, the Philippines is not the first country in the world that has a corruption scandal.
That's true. That's true.
Corruption scandal happen in all countries at different scales and different levels. There have been significant corruption scandals in our region in the last few years, in Malaysia, in Vietnam. So the question is how can the government deal with it as expeditiously as possible in terms of whatever the government or the president wants to do, and immediately restore the confidence. And what happens is that countries learn a lot, and I'm convinced, I'm very optimistic that this can be a complete breakup in terms of doing things in the Philippines. For example, you go to an advanced economy, and I do not know the exact amount, this depends on the country, but cash transactions have a maximum. In other words, you cannot go to a shop and pay more than the equivalent, let's say, to 50,000 peso. The shop would tell you no. Everything has to go through a bank transaction or your credit card. Why? There is a record. In other words, nobody can walk out of a bank in a developed country with the equivalent to $2 million US. There is no such a thing.
Okay.
So what the Philippines is doing now is learning, and the central bank is positively and cleverly reacting to that. So you will see that in the next few months or very soon, we will have similar procedures, similar circulars coming out of BSP saying the maximum that you can book and do a transaction or pay with will be, let's say, 50,000 peso. The rest, everything is via documented. A bank, is a credit card, etc. So that there is a record to do it. This is how progress happens, and we will see that in the Philippines. So once that confidence is restored, and I think that it will not take such a long time, you will see that things will improve. That things will improve in the economy because consumers and investors in particular will feel more confident. And the idea is to say this is not going to happen again. Why? Because the nation has implemented the correct mechanisms to prevent it. And the history of development is about that. I mean, you really believe that the most advanced economies in the world, the ones that today we think are the cleanest, were not quote unquote as dirty and corrupt as the Philippines 100 years ago? The same. The same, and they have progressed.
Are you saying this is a phase?
This is the phase. Is the phase. That is as we develop, income per capita increases, corruption will decline. But you see, there are very simplistic examples that will help you understand this. And again, I hope my examples are not misunderstood. You can today bribe a policeman in the street for a few hundred pesos.
All right.
The reason is very obvious. The salary of the policeman is very low.
Yes.
It takes you a few hundred pesos. It's unthinkable that in a developed country you bribe a policeman who is going to give you a ticket for a couple of hundred pesos. Unthinkable. Because one of them is the implications that would have for the policeman if it is caught, but the other is that the amount is so ridiculous given his salary that he would not pay. It's absolutely ridiculous. So once the salaries of our civil servants increase, the tendency or the incentive to be bribed would really decline, provided that, of course, there is a very strong institutional mechanism behind that, saying if you are caught, you go down, and the law will be after you. And this is what the Philippines is building little by little.
We need to do it faster then.
We need to do it fast, of course.
All
And
right.
that's why I insist that this is a great opportunity to expedite it. It's about learning from the experience of other countries. And once this is done, all this will be history, and the situation will improve dramatically in terms of regaining confidence.
So if our government officials know about this, and I will assume that because of the expertise of the DOF secretaries, because of even the president, I understand, studied economics, they should be understanding the fiat money, and they should be. Why are they not doing it?
That is a $6 million question.
Maybe 1 trillion peso question.
Maybe 1 trillion peso. That is a very good question. That I don't know. We should ask them why they understand. I'm absolutely convinced that there must be people in the administration who really understand verbatim what I am saying. That is, and let me restate it by explaining the way I explained it, how Treasury and central bank create money.
Yes.
I'm not saying that suddenly our budget should be 3 times as large as it is. This requires planning. It's not about saying, and tomorrow suddenly we're going to build another 20,000 kilometers of road, because we may not have capacity or construction companies,
Yes.
etc. But it's starting the discussion the other way around, which is, do we have the money to do it? The answer is yes. And there are some pressing issues that you were asking me before, and this made the opportunity to restate, like addressing poverty in the country, addressing malnutrition, children malnutrition. That has tremendous implications for the future of the country. Poor education. You know that the country,
Then
we have
poor
25
workers,
million
yes.
people in the country who are functionally illiterate.
Ouch.
Those are the statistics recently released by the Philippine Statistics Authority.
Yes.
These are people who can read a paragraph,
But
if you ask them, what does this mean? They will not be able to have a conversation with you. They don't understand.
this is evident on social media.
So much of that is related to poverty, stunting, malnutrition, etc. This is well known. This is well known. So the question is, if you ask me, can this be addressed? I will tell you immediately. Immediately.
Okay, mind blown. What we're saying here is that the government has the capacity to do this. They can address it. They can address poverty.
Sure.
They're not doing this because everything is already at their disposal. They have the fiat money.
Correct.
They have. We actually have long-term planning because of the NEDA, the National Economic Development Authority, which is in charge of all of these plannings and is supposed to be smoothing over transitions between administrations. So there is some form of continuity. But what we're saying here is that the government has it in its power to address poverty, the lack of infrastructure, all of these, if it wanted to.
Correct. Correct. I think the ending of your question is very important. Is if it wanted to. I'm absolutely sure that the Malacañang and the key secretaries in the economic team understand what we are saying. Now, what is the problem that we have in the Philippines? That when the government plans, it happens what you were asking me before, is lack of continuity.
Yes.
So every 6 years we have a new plan. So you were mentioning NEDA's Philippine Development Plan 22-28, correct?
Yes.
Let me ask you a question. You know how long is the document? Have you read it?
The Philippine Development Plan.
Yes.
Okay. I only read the excerpts because I had
Sure.
to, because when I was press secretary, I had to have a basic
We're
understanding.
talking about
yes.
400 pages.
Yes.
You know how many targets does it have?
How many?
Well over 300. You really-
Targets.
Targets.
Okay.
You think it is possible for this country to attain or to achieve properly, meaningfully over 300 objectives. How many of them are really meaningful? How many are really the ones that we need the priority? So one of the things that we have done at La Salle, the team really analyzing the Philippine economy, I told you, 2050, is to make a comparison with how Vietnam or Malaysia do the equivalent documents. It's very different.
How different? How does
Much
it look
more
like?
clear.
All right.
And one of the focuses, one of the key
They have
focuses,
focuses. Okay.
oh, very clear. It goes to precisely the key word that you were mentioning before, industrialization. Let me, apart from the fact that we have an income per capita relatively low, that's how I began answering your question, it's slightly over $4,000 per capita income, which is very low for international standard. The problem, I hope you realize, is that during the last 3 decades, our neighbors have overtaken us. In other words, the Philippines income per capita was higher than that of South Korea in 1960. Do you know that?
Vaguely.
Higher.
Yes. We did.
Definitely, our income per capita was higher than that of China, than that of Indonesia, than that of Thailand. During the last few decades, these countries have overtaken us. What is the latest? What is the most recent? Vietnam. Vietnam's income per capita has overtaken that of the Philippines. Cambodia is behind us, still behind.
Oh, still? Okay.
But you need to ask the question, how have they done it? And again, what I'm doing is compressing probably a long discussion into something very short. They understood the power of industrialization, the power of sending workers out of agriculture and creating jobs in industry, and a government that spends. There are many other things that they have done. But you would see how fast the share of employment in agriculture declined in South Korea. It is doing it now in Vietnam. So, you know what is the share of employment in manufacturing in the Philippines? It's just 8% of all our workers. That's all.
One quick question, because we have 2 minutes. We're 2 minutes down. What if you had the opportunity to give very quick advice to the president? What would you do? What would you say?
These 2 things. First of all, do not be scared of spending.
Okay.
Do not be scared of spending. This requires some
don't
planning.
think he's scared of spending.
But don't be scared of spending. Don't think that we cannot spend because we don't have taxes. And the second one is you focus on industrialization. And then what are the things that have to be done? For example, do we have a peso that is overvalued or not? Things like that. And really, what we need is a development plan that is 50 pages. We don't need more than that. Focusing on industrialization, which is what Vietnam has been doing during the last few years, and why Vietnam has overtaken the Philippines in income per capita.
One last question. Build. Good idea?
Sure. On paper, yes. The question is the execution. We'll have to agree into the execution, etc. But the idea that we need infrastructure is undeniable.
Thank you very much, sir. Dr. Jesus Felipe, professor at the De La Salle University. Thank you for being here.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me on the show.
This wraps up today's episode of The Spokes. For now, don't settle for just one side of the story, because every issue has 2 perspectives, and the truth may be somewhere in between. I am Attorney Trixie Cruz-Angeles. We'll see you again tomorrow here at The Spokes.